Ladies and gentlemen, Gay Kim here. Welcome to the Daily Update. Hope you guys had a good day trading today. Market is up quite a bit. As you can see, S&P is up about 2.5%. If the market is up about 2% or more, that's a monster bullish day. Because again, the up days usually are not huge up like that, hugely up like that. Usually, the bulls like to operate inch by inch type of manner. Usually they like to go up maybe 0.5% to maybe 1% or so, 1.2%, maybe 1.5. But when you got about 2.5, at one point, I think towards of before this happened, I think we got close to 3% on the S&P. Nasdaq and semis 3% there. Dow 2%, Russell 2000 3.5%. Russell continues to thrive to the upside. Everything else about 2, 3. Emerging markets about 2.6. Grayscale, Bitcoin is about 6. Gold and silver is all pretty much flat today. VIX got hammered down 16% there. So let's stick with the 65-minute chart spider here. So we talked about on the weekend video that we talked about how we could probably, most likely have shenanigan to the upside or downside because we were in a downtrend in the short term, but we were in an uptrend in the midterm. Remember, we extensively talked about that on the weekend video. And with today's move, with that gap up that we saw, definitely a shenanigan gap up because I personally didn't expect this to happen. I don't think anybody did, especially the fact that this thing came down pretty hard and we saw some dip buying activities there on Friday, but then it did close the day pretty weak going into the weekend. So I think a lot of people were expecting to see this market continuing to the downside. Again, market loves to fool the majority, and you trying to gamble it or trying to figure out what the market is going to do next day. Trust me, market is much, much smarter than you are. Market knows how to fool you if that's what you're trying to do. I'm trying to just figure out, you're trying to predict what the market is going to do. That's why, we stick with the what's been working. We stick with the trend. And this is the reason why, we did have a short-term weakness, but we were in the midterm bullish, right? We talked about that longer-term moving average there. And back in late January, right, we talked about the resume, the weighty resume that it has, just because we know that back in late January, this thing was at 368 or so. This thing got up to 395, and that's after hitting that long-term moving average. If you check my analysis back in January, I probably said the same thing. Bearish in the short term, bullish in the mid to long term, and then you see how quickly it has gone up there, right? Same thing happened here. This one's a little bit trickier because we initially saw a strong bounce on Friday, right? You see that strong bounce and then hit that short term and then pretty much lost all that gain that is on the first hour. And then I think with that move, or second hour, and with that move, I think a lot of bulls were discouraged going into the weekend, and a lot of bears were hyped up going into the weekend. But shenanigan like this happened, upside shenanigan today, because we're in a midterm uptrend, right? We talked about this again, looking at things in a big picture, not to get overly dramatically get into extreme conclusion just because we see a big drop like that. It takes more than just a couple days of drawdowns to completely dismantle the trend that it has been since really October lows, right? Pre-election week, right? And ever since then, we've been in a midterm, long-term uptrend. And within that midterm, long-term uptrend, we did have that fluctuations, short-term downtrend. So I think today's question is, with this move, are we now back to short-term uptrend? Because we know that we're back to mid-term uptrend, long-term uptrend, but are we in a short-term uptrend now? So let's figure that out. First of all, what is the definition of uptrend? Higher lows and higher highs, right? We talked about in the weekend analysis that we are in an uptrend, the mid-term and long-term. But in the short term, do we have higher highs and higher lows? We don't. We got the high, lower high, as of today, as of now, with the data that is at hand, lower highs and lower lows. So technically speaking, we're actually still in this downtrend type of formation. That doesn't mean it can't change as quickly as tomorrow morning if this thing decided to just break above it and start doing something like that. Then that will be higher high and then higher low, right? So we're right at the juncture where bulls can turn things around very, very quickly here, right on that resistance, right? But another scenario might be that this is where things could get, because we're a bit hyped up right now. We saw that very hyped up move, and then it came down pretty quickly, and then like it made an initial move, came back down, and then just gotten right back up. So we are actually witnessing very emotional market at this point. But I do have to say, with this big gap up and continuation to the upside, because we're still in the midterm uptrend and the long-term moving average, looking at the 65-minute here, held and bounced, and this gap still open. We talked about this gap, it was going to be crucial going into this week, right? And I emphasize the fact that bulls want to make sure to hold this level, and they did that, right? So with another gap that we have on top of this gap that just held, on coinciding with the long-term moving average, I would have to say that today's move actually does have a lot of weight. And I would have to say we do have lower highs on here, but I want to give benefit of the doubt to the buyers in the long-term, mid-term, and the short-term with wildcard. When I say wildcard, I mean there could be another shenanigan to the downside. Some sort of fakey head fake move just so that market can punish those who chased at the top today. If everything goes according to plan, if everything moves conventional sense, I would expect to see continuation tomorrow or maybe even another gap up. But if we do see a slide, either we're going to find support in that short-term moving average, we'll come back to retest that 385. Even if it comes down a little bit lower, that's okay. Maybe back here, 384. To retest some of these levels before going back up, and with that, market will cultivate that higher low and then gets up back to the all-time highs and higher high. I'm leaning towards that scenario that we're going to continue to the upside despite the fact that we are on that resistance, just because the way the market moved today and the gap was a big gap, and we held that gap. I think it was like a 1.2% gap up, and then that thing continued on all day long, and at one point it was a 3% update. If this would have happened in a major primary, I don't even have to say major, let's say this happened in a downtrend, in a mid to long-term downtrend. Because obviously we're in an uptrend in the mid to long term, correct? Right? We got higher lows. We're in an uptrend. That's why I'm giving more weight to the bullish side. But let's say all this stuff that we saw today, it happened in a downtrend. Like this thing was doing this and happened. I would actually say that we're still in a downtrend. It actually is still vulnerable for bulls. That's what I would say. If this would have happened in a downtrend where there's lower highs and lower lows in a mid to long term. But we don't have that. We're in a mid to long term uptrend, and we saw this gap open and this gap held. Bears should have fill this gap, or better yet, gap it down. Remember we talked about this. Bears really want to see this thing coming down, take out this low, fill this gap, needed to gap it down. They had a chance because it definitely closed the day weak on Friday. But then again, something I like to say a lot is, one, market fools the majority. Two, we want to give respect to that midterm and long-term uptrend, right? And so these kind of things can happen in an uptrend. And it feels like bears never win since the March lows, but this is a market we've been dealing with since then. So we have to assume that this will continue until that trend changes, right? Let's check out that oscillator. Potentially we get a little bit of better idea there. Well, looking at that oscillator, actually, we're not overbought. We still have a little bit or more room to move. Bulls known to push it up all the way, sometimes even grind sideways for days. We're pushing it up. So we're just right on the resistance on that price. So if we do move higher to the upside, this will break out, continue to the upside, and hit that overbought level. It will be good to see this oscillator hitting that overbought level. That's when you're gonna see there's a strength in this move. But let's say this thing starts to fall and then this thing crosses back down. That might be a little bit of a, nothing crazy, little bit of cautionary signal in the short term that maybe this run doesn't have much of a leg. But I would have to see it though, how it's gonna deal with that gap. As long as this gap doesn't get filled, and that's a big gap. And because of the fact that this gap's still open and held as support right on that long-term moving average, I would have to say this gap is pretty strong support, and this is a level that we're gonna watch how this market plays out. I've been tweeting things out pretty much all day today at 2K Kim on StockTwits and Twitter. So if I see anything tomorrow, I'll tweet things out. Enjoy your evening and good luck trading tomorrow.